All right, good afternoon, Kansas Aviation partners. We'll get started here. Welcome to the Emerging Aviation Technology Working Group meeting. A couple of items to go over. Please make sure your mic is on mute until you're ready to speak. This meeting is being recorded, and barring any technical difficulties, we will make that recording available after the meeting time. Fairly light agenda for today, but a very meaningful potential agenda for this state. So I wanted to go over this information with you. We'll start out with just discussing a high-level AAM roadmap progress. Right now, as you know, the state is conducting an advanced air mobility implementation roadmap, and we're halfway through that process. The roadmap should be completed sometime around Q4 of this year. The roadmap consultant has reached out to numerous stakeholders within the state and engaged with those stakeholders to understand their prospective roles, their efforts, what they would love to get out of the emerging aviation technology, just so we can understand the various pieces around the state. The roadmap is intended for all of Kansas. It's not intended for a specific organization. So this isn't a Department of Commerce or KDOT or academia specific. This isn't KSU's plan. This is the state of Kansas roadmap. And the roadmap will actually have various components that'll be broken up into parts that are easy to implement, and they can be implemented over time. It's not intended to be an overnight implementation of the roadmap. So there will be components regarding the roadmap that are role specific. So if you're with academia, you can go to the academic institution section and understand your role and how what your needs are and what the state needs from you, essentially. And there will be other infrastructure and other parts of the roadmap. With the roadmap, there will be market analysis and an economic impact study. We are hopeful that it will be meaningful for the state, and again, meaningful for all of the organizations within the state, especially those that helped contribute. So thank you for that. Expect that around Q4 of this year, and we're hopeful to be able to roll that out at the end of the year and have some meaningful and progressive items included in that. With that said, we do have some items that we would like to discuss that are meaningful now. And this is an emerging aviation technology working group. We are looking at AAM roadmap, and that is a very specific usage of emerging technology. But emerging aviation technology goes beyond advanced air mobility. It includes drones, especially large drones, and it includes being able to take those UAS or the drones and be able to use those in a commercial application or in a public safety application. And in order to do that, there is infrastructure that is needed. So we'd like to discuss that type of infrastructure, start socializing the idea about getting that infrastructure within the state and looking for potential implementation on that can be scaled up based on the operations and based on identifying those potential use cases. We have several parties throughout the state that are interested in the technology that could probably use it as soon as it's developed and installed, but we wanted to basically touch base with this group, get your input, let you know this is what is on our radar, and by our, I mean the state. Not intending to have this be a KDOT discussion. It can't be. So we have various partners, whether it's, again, KDOT, Commerce, academic institutions, commercial operators. There's numerous use cases for the technology, and we can use the technology to be able to operationalize drones and small and large, and be able to do more with them and be able to improve the lives of Kansans. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Mr. Brian Casson. And Brian, feel free to go ahead and share your slide deck.
Okay, I was just gonna take control right quick here. So go ahead and give me permission for that if you don't mind.
Yep. I'm on a single screen, so let me go ahead and see. Did you request
I did.
access there?
I'm just waiting for approval here. You're the creator. I tell you what, if you don't mind, I only have a few slides. I don't really like to be married to them anyway. I'll just ask that you advance it.
Okay.
So the point here, everyone, is that we have to go ahead and in order to have advanced operations of UAS in the airspace, we have to go ahead and make sure that's safe, obviously. And the way to do that traditionally has been an individual using their eyes to see and avoid. But the problem is with this nascent technology, you can't do that anymore because clearly the pilot or operator is not in the aircraft. And so it requires a different set of items to do the same level of safety as being able to have a pilot inside the aircraft to see and avoid, which most on this call are pretty familiar with. And so, what that really means now going forward is a technological solution. In the past, we have done it as an extension of what we know of see and avoid, which is effectively having visual observers to where we're having spotters in communication with the remote pilot in command, be another set of eyeballs. And that is effective, but clearly, what that doesn't take into account is the economic utility that is necessary. So, you're trading the advantage of the technology allowing things that weren't possible before, particularly lower barriers to entry to get into the airspace. And now you're having to deal with another constraint of human beings being in the loop. And that, of course, is an economic problem that is oftentimes incredibly onerous to have. And it's something we needed to do, though, because that is what it took for the FAA to allow us to get into the air. We're now at the stage in maturity in the state of Kansas, particularly because we happen to be a lead participant in an exclusive newer program for this newer technology called the Beyond program. Like I said, we're one of 8 lead participants in the country for it. It started off, for just a little bit of history, as the Integration Pilot Program, IPP for short, and then that dovetailed into the Beyond program. Several on this call have been partners in the IPP and now through Beyond. FAA reauthorization that was put into law back in May extended that program for another 4 years. And there is a profound appetite with FAA to go ahead and leverage that program to address just this, the detect and avoid issue. Because we have to have a technological solution to proxy, in effect, the ability of safety that is had by seeing and avoiding, which is what we traditionally have had. And the term for that is usually electronic conspicuity. And it's a fancy word, but it just effectively means a technological solution to take the place of you see something in the way and you get the heck out of the way. We all do it in our cars routinely. This is the same thing in the airspace. There are multiple technologies that are suited for this. And our neighbors, quite frankly, are already deploying these. In Kansas, a good faith effort argument could have been made that we should have gotten into this before. However, I feel that we were deliberate in not wanting to go ahead and be the first into the breach so that we could actually have a very deliberate and intentional understanding as far as what our regulator, which is only the FAA of the airspace, will effectively agree towards. And that wasn't known in the past. Now we are at the point, particularly with the latest FAA reauthorization, that they are getting to yes because they're understanding it much better than they used to. And they're wanting to be working in concert with states for this. And it really is required to have beyond visual line of sight and autonomy to go ahead and have the economic items and commercialization items addressed of the technology. When you constantly have to have people at every stage dealing with operations, we've really traded one bottleneck for another. And frankly, the bottleneck of staffing and human labor hours is often the most onerous part of all. So the state of Kansas, and I do again want to echo what Ray was saying, the state of Kansas has to do this. This cannot just be a KDOT effort or any other entity effort because we need to go ahead and take into account the totality of use cases, needs, and an honest needs assessment as far as what that is. Because um, I really bristle to the idea of always emulating what others have done because we can clearly use lessons learned, but we don't really need, or I would argue, shouldn't have a cookie cutter approach interstate or even intrastate because the needs, even intrastate, are going to be radically different in some circumstances. And we need a right sized, Kansas appropriate answer to this. Um, as I noted, there are several technologies possible. Um, the visual one I noted before is the human eyeball. There are sensors or electronic conspicuity that are electro-optical that take the place of that. They use visual technologies. There are also acoustic ones. Some on this call are familiar with Zipline and others that use an acoustic detect and avoid technology. However, the one that I would probably like to emphasize the most are the ground-based radar solution sets. Those are the ones currently that the FAA has the most appetite for and the most understanding of. And I would argue are the ones that we should definitely have in our arsenal and portfolio moving forward. Again, these are what our neighbors, particularly our neighbor North Dakota to the far north, has famously with their Vances system, but also the state of Alaska, the state of Virginia, and our neighbor to the south, Oklahoma, is deploying. And again, I'm not in the business of picking a particular technology, but we have to do what is amenable with our regulator to allow advanced operations. The worst thing, in my humble opinion, that we could do would be to spend taxpayer money on an item that is at best suboptimal, at worst not palatable to the regulator and doesn't have the desired effect. We all have good intent here, but we have to make sure that we continue the notion of being deliberate so that we have flawless execution. If you don't mind hitting the next slide and advancing. Thank you. Here are the use cases. It sounds really great for Brian to get up here and say that we need a particular technology to do something, but I'd like to drill down a little bit to address a little bit more specificity. First, in this, I feel has to be public safety. Public safety is a value proposition that the state of Kansas understands intimately well, particularly in, I would say, the last 45 to 50 days, given the inclement weather that we have experienced. Public safety incorporates in Kansas disaster response for major mutual aid situations that can be scaled across the state, wildfires, tornado events, blizzards, but it can also be items that are a little more localized, as noted here in a drone as a first responder for law enforcement or for medical. Our good friends with Wichita PD are investigating the DFR model. It has a benefit of, again, trying to take human beings out of the loop when they're not necessary and strategically putting them in places that they're needed for the best gains. The quintessential example of this that Chief Joe and Lieutenant Purcell with Wichita PD have noted is that unbelievably they have multiple issues of having to dispatch officers to false alarm situations. Something so simple as a mail carrier trips a ring door camera and the individual doesn't realize it's in fact the mail carrier. They think it's a suspicious individual. They go ahead and call their neighbor and see and ask them if they see anything. The neighbor calls 911 thinking that it's a burglar. Come to find out, it literally was the mail carrier or a meter reader or someone else with good intent. And that asset allocation of law enforcement in areas where they're not needed clearly has the opportunity cost of taking officers away from areas where they are needed. That has a safety risk and safety opportunity cost, but it also has a profound expense when it comes to underutilization and misallocation of personnel. So they want to go ahead and use drone as a first responder to dispatch to gain situational awareness overhead to ascertain, does an officer need to respond, yes or no? If they do, it will provide overwatch and allow greater situational awareness rather for law enforcement. But the most important takeaway is the return on investment of proper allocation of personnel, more timely, more as far as the most necessary and appropriate response in general of human beings, which are the most expensive portion. Also, in the public safety item is something rather close to home for KDOT is infrastructure inspection. Allowing detect and avoid technologies to take the place of human beings will allow greater work for long line linear infrastructure inspections rather than have to constantly pick up pick up sticks and move down the line constantly so that the aircraft is within visual line of sight. It will allow the constraint of the distance that the aircraft can fly within its range capability of its power supply. And it frankly will just allow greater efficiency and operational function of the technology. Evergy immediately comes to mind with this, of being able to explore their high voltage transmission lines in the most effective way possible. And so then the next item is commercial development. We don't have drone delivery in the state of Kansas. However, if we are going to go ahead and try to leverage this technology from the commercial side to the farthest extent, we have to go ahead and do what is necessary for the regulator to allow it. Famously, the key site down in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex is allowing drone delivery right now from FAA. There are the economics have to work to make it be reasonable for companies to do that. However, even if they could go ahead and have an economic model for their business model that works, it doesn't do anything if they can't get off the ground because the regulator feels that the safety case is not where it needs to be. And they have routinely shown and continue to express, particularly again with their objectives that they laid out for KDOT and the other lead participants in the Beyond program, that infrastructure and particularly infrastructure in concert with FAA and how those guidelines, roles, and models look jointly between both levels of government, those being state, territorial, tribal, um, and the federal government, how those meet out is of the utmost importance to them. But make no bones about it, it has to be a safe item that they're going to allow, particularly in rather conflicted and populated areas, because they have to manage the ground risk and the air risk. We also see this, but to a lesser extent, with agricultural operations. Yes, agricultural operations tend to be in sparsely populated areas, so you don't have the same level of ground population risk that you would with a Google Wing drone delivery for Walmart or similar. However, at the same time, our regulator, understandably, and I agree with, I think everyone on this call does, that the safety case is of the utmost importance. So allowing precision agricultural operations or drone delivery or other commercial applications that are advanced will require a technological solution, particularly a ground-based radar, which is really what UPS Flight Forward and others that have gotten agreements from FAA for advanced operations that are commercial. We really need to have this to frankly just get them to yes. The last pillar I want to emphasize is arguably in some regards the most important. I think everyone on this call is familiar with what has happened in the Northeast, particularly in the New Jersey. The more negative or black hat items that it oftentimes involve security will really guide the vector for items. the same technology that is for detect and avoidance to deconflict airspace also has a counter UAS component oftentimes, because there's a big misunderstanding sometimes as far as what counter means. Oftentimes it is thought of in a DoD type of situation akin to the geopolitical issues over in Ukraine. That is not what we're talking about here. Only Department of Homeland Security has jurisdiction of that type of counter system. What we're talking about here is really DTI, which is detect, track, and identify. And in light of what has happened in the Northeast and frankly, the oftentimes um, absence of understanding and the filling in of that gap is often taken from a more malintent side just because it's misunderstanding or lack of any understanding. It has really driven the needle recently, particularly on the federal level, so much so that there's now the House Subcommittee on Aviation had a hearing on counter UAS. A colleague of mine in the Beyond program from Alaska, Dr. Catherine Cahill, was one of the panelists that spoke about this. And it has really caught on federally to the extent that there is even now discussion of rolling back and adjusting federal preemption, wherein the entirety, up to and including being able to define what the National Airspace System is, has always been the purview of FAA due to federal preemption. Now there is legislative discussion of creating some level of preemption and jurisdictional access of the airspace for the purposes of counter UAS to those that are outside the FAA and the federal government, specifically state governments. Very analogous to post 9/11 and the Patriot Act. This is a similar item in that sometimes security drives the vector forward, and that further emphasizes the need for detect and avoid because it can be used for both DTI, maybe surveillance of black hats versus commercialization of more operational items that are more white hat centric. The technology is, frankly, it's surveillance. It could surveil and note items in the sky of whatever intent there really is. But again, it's to detect, track, and identify. And this is an opportunity to allow us to have the technology on a state level for both purposes, but more importantly, if it opens up the preemption of the airspace to the states, there would be, and there has been discussion federally of federal monies to support this, provided that the states and the stakeholders within the states are willing partners to be part of it. So it would be a situation I envision of the states provide some level of functional architecture and investment that would have a partnership of some sort of matching program with the federal government, particularly for states that are forward leaning in this sector. Go ahead and advance to the next one. Now, to dig down a little bit deeper on counter, the thing about counter that is most important to understand is that, again, it is detect, track, and identify. We are not talking kinetic energy weapons here. We are not talking about blasting things out of the sky. But having said that, there is federal movement afoot to empower local law enforcement, as far as even municipal, up to and including state law enforcement, to have some expanded counter jurisdictional authority. And it would also, there's been discussion on having further testing to advance the technology past where it is currently with detect, track, and identify. Unfortunately, like many things, technology can also be somewhat reactionary, and the market isn't really inclined to go ahead and come up with a capability that there really isn't a demand pull to justify. Now that the situation in the New Jersey area really energized so many into understanding aviation and to look up at lights in the sky, and have a greater understanding of what is out there and what is capable, there is now a reaction to that of allowing and understanding what technology do we have to ascertain who's doing what and where, and are they doing it with good intent, unknown intent, or is this just something that has always been okay and we were oblivious to it? So the counter UAS movement on the federal level, frankly, is an opportunity, and it is an opportunity that we really need to seize and leverage it for the state as a forward-leaning entity in this nascent technology. And this isn't just to look at the security side of bad actors or potential bad actors, but we have to recognize that that is a capability and a potential, particularly with the FIFA World Cup coming in 2026. I was actually in a meeting today from Department of Homeland Security. They're here in town, and they expressed how they are going to the various location sites for the World Cup, and they are trying to prepare these areas for the potential for there to be unfortunate security events, and they're trying to get ahead of it. And the counter UAS threat is one of the top ones on their proverbial radar for this. So when you have a large multinational event of this sort in areas and a greater understanding of the potential for aerial items to exist, like the New Jersey situation has shown, it frankly is energizing access, understanding, and desire to go ahead and do something to be proactive ahead of the World Cup that wouldn't, there really wouldn't be an impetus otherwise without this. So it will allow a better opportunity for the state of Kansas. I know it's going to officially be an Arrowhead Stadium, but some of the prognostication I've seen is within a roughly 3 hour driving distance of the actual stadiums that are being used are all in the radius of what is going to be pulled into the FIFA World Cup. So I don't want this group to think that, okay, it's officially going to be in Missouri, so it really won't have spillover into Kansas. I think it's going to have profound spillover into Kansas. And that is a great thing. However, the detection for counter UAS and the tracking and identification notions of it are things that we really need to go ahead and seize and make sure that it is something we are able to leverage fully. Um, so that if you'll go ahead and hit the next slide, Ray. Thank you. Now, after I beat the counter drum heavily, I want to come back to where I think the lasting implication is for detect and avoid, and that is the commercialization of the technology. In back when the IPP first started for the state of Kansas, there was a lot of good work done in concert with actually several people on this call. And we are at a maturity level now, though, that doing items and being able to show the art of the possible, while very meritorious at the time, we've actually matured past that. And now it really needs economic utility and the ability to be economically sustainable on its own. And that's really where commercialization comes in. The biggest the biggest bottleneck, quite frankly, in my opinion, and it is shown by the amount of and types of operations that the FAA has agreed to, is the FAA component of our regulator not giving things the green light. There is now an understanding with the FAA that there are key stakeholders in this space, the beyond lead participants, those that are involved in the FAA UAS Center of Excellence with Assure, like our institutions of academia in the state, Wichita State, Kansas State, KU, are members of this, that these key individual players have a deep understanding and ability in this space to do advanced operations that frankly weren't permitted before. And now that doesn't exist as a gatekeeping function. Rather, what does exist, though, is the ability to do these things a little bit more, I would argue, at scale and integrated into the airspace, as opposed to in the past, they were often a little bit more along the lines of what I would call a science project, being able to show that it's possible. And again, that has value. They were oftentimes waivers for research purposes. Again, very valuable in what it is. But now that we have done that part of the phased approach, we can accelerate and build upon that momentum. And that's where commercialization is vital. It will allow our state to not just show what the art of the possible is, but what the art of operationally we should be doing. And that is allowing us to hand the baton to commercial operations so that it can be self sustaining and realize business models that have cost efficiencies baked in to allow it to continue on its own. Much like how my agency has roads that facilitate the transfer of goods and services to allow business to operate well. That's really the next stage of UAS and even AAM, is that it's the creation of infrastructure for detect and avoid that allows our regulator to allow us to, in effect, have roadways in the sky for advanced operations, just like we do for road operations for surface transportation. When I look out my window here, I'm able to see the Pope Quincy Viaduct and I-70, and I see constant traffic. And it is, frankly, the lifeblood, oftentimes, of commercial operations. For this sector in the airspace to do that very similar activity, our regulator has to sign off on it. And the route to our regulator doing that is by having detect and avoid infrastructure. And it will, frankly, democratize the airspace and allow advanced operations that other states want to do and haven't been able to yet. And it built upon the very valuable items we have done as a Beyond partner, as a state government, as organizations of academia, and as private sector players in the state to make sure that not only is Kansas the air capital of the world as they have been in the past for legacy aviation, but that we build upon and frankly, again, seize that momentum to make darn sure that the latest evolution of aircraft, we're still the air capital of the world and that we are leading the charge and not being reactionary. And the last bit I will leave this before the discussion period for is that this group is advanced air mobility focused. It can be a little fuzzy at times where UAS and AAM are discrete and where there is overlap in that Venn diagram. I usually like to note that advanced air mobility moves high value things up to and including people. And these are going to be overwhelmingly type certificated aircraft. Um, that is my definition. But regardless of the definition that is used, detect and avoid technologies that are ground based and oftentimes vehicle to vehicle based can be used amongst both sets of sector aircraft. It is harder the smaller the aircraft gets. So, in a lot of regards, advanced air mobility is easier in this space, such that it detect and avoid technology that's ground based, especially that can detect a small UAS, isn't really going to have trouble seeing a large aircraft the size of a Cessna. So, there are synergies and efficiencies that can be realized with this technology. So I don't want this group to feel that it's out of scope to be discussing UAS detect and avoid, because um, honestly, oftentimes advanced air mobility, while early on is probably going to be piloted in IFR operations, there are scenarios like WISC and others that deal in the autonomous side of not being piloted. So the discussion of detect and avoid is worthy in UAS and AAM because so often the detect and avoid feature for architecture will be able to detect items large. That won't be difficult. Our neighbors, Oklahoma to the south, have actually just a couple of weeks ago in their plan have brought that out. So I just wanted to dispel any notions that these items are discrete, because in this situation, while there are discrete features, this isn't one of those. So I open the floor up to some discussion, because I know Ray, of course, had that uh, in the agenda here.
There are any comments, please jump forward. One thing I would like to add to Brian's conversation there, when several of the stakeholders were getting together to form this group, we didn't want to call it an AAM group because that term could potentially change, and it has changed multiple times depending on the use case. This is an emerging aviation technology group, and I think it encompasses more than just an AAM focus. I think the stakeholders on this call are rather engaged and potentially able to work through and benefit from or add to the conversation at least. Some of the discussion topics, and I think there was someone that wanted to kind of jump in, but if you allow me a real quick minute here, some of the discussion topics that Brian brought forward, on the commercial applications, commercial applications are amazing and they would be extremely amazing for the state. Beyond that, there's also a public safety component that I think cannot be underscored. Brian mentioned our neighbor to the south, Oklahoma, and I know Doug is on the call as well. I, in my younger days, I flew fire patrol in Oklahoma for a couple of weeks, and it was a couple of weeks because it got to got to the point where it was dangerous for me to fly, but someone needed to still fly and look to see if there were forest fires. That's not the case if there was UAS. There are things that UAS can do without putting a human at risk. And this type of application can be deployed in those types of scenarios. Do we have fire danger in Kansas? Absolutely. What about mass casualty events or natural disasters? We look at what's happening in California, unfortunately happened in North Carolina. Kansas gets our fair share of tornadoes and flooding events. This technology can help. If it's deployed, we can get a drone up in the sky and be able to explore areas and look for, perform search and rescue and be able to go further, longer without having to be in the middle of the specific area where there is a natural disaster. It could be extremely life-saving. And what value do you put on that? Medical deliveries, to our rural communities. Our rural communities are struggling to get timely deliveries of medical supplies, or potentially maybe perhaps, and one of my dreams is to be able to deliver an AED by a drone and get it to someone faster so they can potentially help save a life. Well, this technology gets us one step closer. We're still far away from being able to do that, in a timely manner, but it gets us certainly one step closer. The research and development component for Kansas would be amazing. There's just a lot of applications that this would help enable, not just the commercial application, but certainly not downgrading the commercial application. That's extremely important. It could literally mean the difference between life and death. So that's my 2 cents. There was someone that wanted to jump in.
Hey, Ray, this is Tim.
Hey, Tim.
Hey there.
You want
Couple
me to
of
stop
things
sharing here so you can share your item, or?
yeah, absolutely. I'll share here. At first, I was going to make a quick comment. Ray and I are here in DC attending a conference, and some things that were brought up about AAM and UAS were education and public acceptance. And one thing that, on one of Brian's slide there with the public safety use case, I really think that's kind of our you might say, to start really promoting public acceptance and buy-in of UAS and AAM type technology. They can see it in action. I know, Brian, you mentioned Wichita Police Department there. I did see a news article where they have on their website, I believe it is, that you can actually track where their drones are and see what's going on, so people aren't wondering who's up in the air and stuff. They have access to that information. So again, just another step on the buy-in there. So the other item that I would like to share, let me pull up a screen here if I can, if it allows
You should be
me.
able to share. And Tim, while
Okay.
you're
Yep.
doing that, we so KDOT has other technology that is UAS specific, and we can discuss this at a later date. But
Mhm.
uh, Brian, told me a story about, you were talking about the public acceptance of the technology. Brian told me a story about one of our outreach events where the UAS was able to help find a lost child
Mhm.
at one of our events. So, there's extreme value in being able to gather that information. And you're absolutely right. The public acceptance and outreach is going to be extremely vital, whether we're talking about AAM or UAS. We have to have a strong communications and outreach effort. But go ahead,
Yeah.
Tim.
Absolutely. So, yeah, the other thing I wanted to mention here, everybody, was so there is a bill, it's number House Bill 2308, and it's deemed AIM-K. So it's the Aviation and Innovative Manufacturing in Kansas bill. And basically, what this is an incentive program that's taken some of the good stuff of the programs we currently have, and it's putting it into one package that is actually designed to go after aviation and automotive type industries that are geared towards EV, hydrogen, different sources like that. So you can see here under the qualifying programs, aircraft assembly and vehicle manufacturers, the component and subassembly manufacturers, national headquarters, we're talking research and development facilities, sustainable aviation fuel production, and hydrogen production are the qualifiers for this program. And I won't go into all the details, but I will drop this into the chat so you can look it over. The main thing I wanted to point out on this is I believe, and let me take a look at something else here real quick. Not what I wanted to look at, but I'll do this. Um, let's see. Word docs, PDFs. I got too many windows open, and yeah, I'm with Ray. I'm working off a single screen too, and it's no fun. You get spoiled with your double screens. But there is, and I am trying to find that real quick here. Okay. Um, so the hearing for this bill is going to be Tuesday, March 4th at 1:30. And if you're interested, after I drop this in the chat, of supporting us on this endeavor for this incentive, you can, obviously you can be there in person to give testimony, or if you want to, you can have you can submit your testimony by Monday morning via an email, and I'll put that information in the chat also for support on this. But again, it's just another tool that we can use to help attract any kind of businesses to the state to advance this. And again, once we have, the avoid and detect and all the infrastructure we need, this will just be another bonus for us to jump in and attract this business. And that's your return on investment on this infrastructure that we're talking. So I will do that right here. I'm going to drop that into the chat here in a minute.
Perfect. Sounds good.
Alrighty.
Any other questions or discussion? Or Tim, I'm sorry, did you have something more
Nope.
to add?
No, that was everything I had. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Perfect. So, there are a ton of use cases that would be extremely meaningful for the state. The question is, what next, right? So there's infrastructure that we can potentially look at in a phased approach. Obviously, we can't go border to border, corner to corner in the state because we don't have the funding to be able to do that. But we don't need to do that again overnight. We can look at a phased approach, but in order to do that, we need to understand the potential benefit and use cases that would be meaningful for the state. So what we're hoping to get out of this is, again, to socialize the idea about a state strategy moving forward, to discuss some of the technology that's out there, some of the infrastructure that would be needed, potential use cases. Look for partners, look for those that are interested in participating or partnering or may benefit from the technology or the operations. Also, if you hear something, if you hear someone or a company or an organization that is interested in doing beyond visual line of sight operations or anything UAS specific, or large UAS, drone, uncrewed aircraft, anything along those lines, please reach back out to the group or to one of the stakeholders, and form these meaningful conversations. So don't wait until the next meeting to have the conversation. Let's start getting together to move these state specific efforts moving forward. Love any kind of conversation or question. Otherwise, if not, we'll certainly be more than happy to give some time back to you guys.
Hey, Ray, this
Looks
is
like,
April. Ray,
yes,
can you hear
ma'am.
me? Yeah, hi.
Yes, ma'am.
Hey, Ray and the group, and this is April Jiang from Kansas Department of Commerce. So with that note, I'd like to bring up a update. And we actually, Ray and a few of us yesterday, we actually met with a U.S. commercial service group in Taiwan, and their job is focusing on bringing Taiwanese company to show them around of the state, and would try to invite them to invest in the U.S. And so after yesterday's meeting, actually we are invited to be one of the 6 states to a Taiwan drone supply chain delegation coming to the U.S., one of the 6 states to pitch Kansas to them. So I'm just very excited to report this update to you guys. And it is for us to showcase what Kansas can offer on this drone development or AAM development industry, while we are working so hard to build the industry. And now we are actually, we don't need to wait when there's an opportunity. We just like to let potential customer know. So they are coming, at least this one from Taiwan. Just like to bring this update to everyone, and we will do that presentation on March 19, and we are putting together a PowerPoint. Eventually, I may need information from your valuable input. Or anyone, if you feel we should talk about a highlight of Kansas drone development, please feel free to let me know, and just maybe let me pick your brain. And we would like to put together a very dynamic presentation for this opportunity. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you
Yep.
for sharing
Uh-huh.
that, April. We
Ray,
went, and not to share, a ton of. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mr.
yeah, Ray,
Ewing.
this is Mark Ewing at KU. We, being in the Assure consortium, we've done a good bit of work in detect and avoid. And when you talk about detect and avoid, the hardest part of detect and avoid is detection. So there was some discussion of radar and whatnot. I'd like to just do a little bit of soapboxing. If you could count on everybody out there having ADS-B broadcast and all drones having remote ID broadcast, then there's a possibility that you could build a safety case. But not everybody has ADS-B. We have a lot of I call them cowboys in the country that don't want to have ADS-B on board. So it seems to me the only reasonable thing is to have exclusion zones, basically physical separation. So we have that at all major airports. You're not allowed to go in unless you've got certain, mode C transponder or other requirements. So if there were an exclusion zone, then within that zone, you would need to have radar, just like in a commercial, airport. So I think there's a lot of, when you talk about infrastructure, and I think you started talking about infrastructure, if we're going to have places where you can fly with the safety case that detection is provided by ground-based radar, then that's the infrastructure I think we should be considering. And there's a lot of different players out there. The detect system up at University of North Dakota, Mississippi State has the Canadian UAV Sparrowhawk unit. So I vote for looking into identifying certain corridors or certain regions, maybe 5 nautical miles in in diameter. Excuse me, as being the most important type of infrastructure. Beyond that, I think it would be great if the state of Kansas would stand up and say, if you're going to fly an aircraft of any type and there's a person on board, you must have a DSB transponder, period. And I know that's not popular with a lot of general aviation enthusiasts, but I'm now jumping off my soapbox, turning off my mic.
Thank you for the input. There's, unfortunately, there are some things that, there aren't a lot of state regulations specifically to aviation because that is the realm of the FAA when it comes to being in the air. However, I do love the input regarding exclusion zones. I am looking forward to that additional input regarding looking at the technology and getting your input regarding detect and avoid moving forward. So I'm definitely looking forward to your participation with that. I will tell you, there is, you bring up a good point. There's a ton of technology out there. One of the things that we're kind of discussing, at least internally, is just having a consultant do a review process of the technology that's available, and what would that look like for the state? What would be meaningful specifically for the state for the various use cases? What would work well with our surrounding states? Because this does have to be, we get more value out of it if it's a regional approach as well. So we certainly are interested in, again, same conversation that we've had on AAM, right? We get more value out of it if we can cross state borders and still be able to operate. And I think this is, there's potential for that as well. Our partners to the east and the Kansas City metro area, our partners to the north and to the south, there's a lot of value in being able to cross state borders and not have to switch technology or have to get something else in order to enable your operations. So would love to have your input in that. If we do look at that type of review, love to have your input, period. And that goes for anyone on this call. This is the reason that we're socializing it. We're not working within our silos. We'd love to have a state of Kansas approach to look at the technology, the use cases, potential partners, the value that we get out of it. We're looking at our other state partners to see how we can work well together. So that was my soapbox. So thank you for indulging me there. Any other partners that have any questions or comments or concerns?
Ray, there looks like there's one question in the chat.
All right, I should pay attention to that. Thank you. What type of infrastructure would an airport need to accommodate commercial UAS? Yes. So there is a lot of infrastructure. Brian, do you want to take a stab at, some of the, various, potential infrastructure needs?
Well, I would actually first offer up that we're probably going to be looking at a layered approach that first is going to have remote ID, and then we're really looking to see if we would like ground-based radar or potentially a layered approach. Given where you're at, John, there's another layer to this, that an FAA reauthorization, if entities put in their own architecture and the FAA feels that it is enough skin in the game proverbially and functionally, they are opening up their radar surveillance feed data. They've already done it with our neighbor to the north in North Dakota. And that actually gives a much clearer picture, being able to use their radar feeds additionally as a layered deconflicting approach. So the short answer is I am not omniscient enough to tell you exactly what it would be, which is really part of the reason I like the socialization of an expert to be able to conduct an analysis of what is Kansas sized and what's appropriate. Again, it's going to look different in, just hypothetically, Goodland than I feel it's going to where you're at in your very conflicted airspace. And that's what I'd really like to know, because it's going to look different and it's going to probably be a different technology with a different price point.
One thing I will add to this, there is heightened awareness about aviation safety at this moment. So this is a great time to kind of get in, get some skin in the game essentially, and potentially be able to hopefully leverage some federal dollars moving forward once we have some momentum. Whether that'll happen or not, I don't know. But I will tell you that I am also part of the Runway Safety Committee for the FAA as part of NASAO. And we've had meetings that are specific to safety and runway safety. There are technologies that the FAA is currently testing at several airports, including runway condition lighting system and ground-based radar for surface vehicles. And I believe, I mean, it wouldn't be too far of a leap to go from surface vehicles to, short, distance off the ground for UAS technology that may fill in some of the gaps to traditional radar. I do know that ICT is on the list for testing and that technology testing in the future. But right now, the FAA is testing out at San Antonio in Texas, looking at runway surface condition, or not runway surface condition, but runway status lights, and being able to test an amazing system that, once developed, will help reduce the ground risk and runway incursion risk at our commercial service airports. Great question. Any other questions? Hey, Doug, let's see what we have. Oh, Oklahoma is definitely interested in a partnership. Thank you, Oklahoma. We're always glad to hear that. Thank you very much, sir. Any other questions while we have you? And if not, I mean, this is not going to be the end of the conversation for sure. So please email any of the stakeholders. If you think we need to get a small group together to have breakout conversations, if you need any additional resources or details about any of the stakeholder actions, please reach out to that stakeholder or reach out to us, and we'll be more than happy to engage in the conversation or make connections. Thank you very much. All right, let me go ahead and go over the next meeting. It will be March the 27th. So hopefully we'll see everybody back on March the 27th. If you have any subjects that you'd like to explore, or if you would like an opportunity to be on the agenda with something meaningful for emerging aviation technology, or an ask, or an opportunity, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'll put you on the agenda. So thank you again. Have a wonderful weekend. Stay safe, everybody.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.